Hey everyone, are you ready to really dive into a classic? We're talking Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and honestly, it's kind of crazy how relevant it still is today.
It really is amazing how a story written centuries ago, like literally over 200 years ago, still has so much to say about the world we're living in now.
Right. It's wild. Okay, so for this deep dive, we've got excerpts from the novel itself, obviously, the introduction, the editor's preface, even some discussion questions. So think of this as your Frankenstein cheat sheet, highlighting why it still resonates so strongly after all this time.
And we're going to unpack all of that with the help of our resident literary expert, who I have to say has a way of making even the most complex analysis feel like, well, just chatting with a friend.
Totally. I'm so glad you're here to break it all down with us.
I'm excited to dig in.
Me too. Okay, so there was something in the editor's preface that really jumped out at me right away. Frankenstein actually started as a ghost story writing contest between friends.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mary Shelley, her husband, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron. Can you imagine that group? Talk about an intimidating writing prompt.
Oh, absolutely. That's a serious lineup of literary giants. Just that creative energy in one room. It's incredible to think about. And speaking of incredible, the preface mentions that Mary Shelley was unbelievably young when she wrote this.
Yeah, crazy young, right?
Yeah, like shockingly young. She was only 18 when she wrote Frankenstein.
18. I can't even imagine. And that fact makes this next part even wilder. All these years later, the editors of our text are these, as they put it, three middle-aged guys. And they're very aware of the fact that they're potentially appropriating Mary's work.
Yeah, they talk about that right at the beginning.
They do. And I think it's great that they acknowledge it up front. But they're also very intentional about highlighting the crucial role women have played, both in Frankenstein's creation and its long-lasting legacy. And we're going to circle back to that a little bit later when we get into the themes of the book. But it's a really important point.
Absolutely. It's something that we'll definitely want to explore in more detail.
For sure. Now, I've always thought of Frankenstein as kind of a cautionary tale. You know, scientist gets a little carried away, tries to play God.
It's definitely one way to interpret it.
Right. It's a classic for a reason.
It is a classic. And while those themes are definitely there, I think the reason it has resonated with readers for centuries is that Frankenstein really dives deep into some seriously timeless ethical questions. It's about the potential consequences of unchecked ambition, particularly when it comes to the pursuit of scientific discovery. It forces us to consider our responsibility when it comes to the power of creation, especially when the outcome doesn't quite go according to plan.
Okay, I think we need to unpack that a little bit. When you say results that don't quite go according to plan, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, think about it this way. We're living in a time of incredible scientific advancement, right? Like right now we're on the cusp of being able to manipulate the very building blocks of life. We have things like gene editing. But what about the ethics of wielding that kind of power?
It's like those designer baby scenarios you hear about.
Yes, exactly. Or think about the unforeseen consequences of even trying to define what makes us human. We're talking about real dilemmas that scientists and ethicists are actually grappling with today. It's not science fiction anymore. And these are the very questions that Mary Shelley was exploring all the way back in the 1800s.
That's what I love about great literature. It has this amazing way of staying relevant across generations, prompting important conversations no matter when you read it.
I totally agree. And I think in the case of Frankenstein, it encourages all of us to examine our own relationship with scientific progress. Because it's not always a straight line from discovery to innovation, right?
It's definitely not.
There are twists and turns, unintended outcomes, ethical quandaries. It's rarely as simple as we might think.
So it's not just about the can we, but the should we. Yeah. Right.
Precisely. And what happens when we think we're acting with the best of intentions, but our actions end up having unintended consequences? Frankenstein forces us to confront the very nature of progress itself.
And it's not just science fiction either, right? We see anxieties about unintended consequences play out in the real world all the time. Like when Frankenfood started making headlines, people were really concerned about genetically modified organisms.
Yeah.
And it's amazing technology, but it definitely sparked a lot of public debate and fear. What do you think?
For sure. And that's a perfect example of how Frankenstein is still relevant to us today, even after all these years. Because those anxieties we have now, whether it's about GMOs or things like AI, they often come from the same place as the core themes Mary Shelley was exploring in her novel. The power of creation, and then facing those unintended consequences. It always comes back to the question of our responsibility for what we create, what we unleash upon the world.
It's a big one for sure. And speaking of things that are still relevant today, The editors of our text actually spend a good amount of time discussing the challenges that Mary Shelley faced as a woman navigating the literary world in the 19th century. There's actually a part in the preface where they quote a review of the book from the British critic, and it's kind of hard to read, to be honest. The reviewer basically says that the flaws in Frankenstein are because a woman wrote it. Like literally, they blame the supposed flaws of the text on the gender of the author.
Wow.
It's just so frustrating to read, even now.
It is, but it really does give you a sense of like the deeply ingrained societal norms of that time period. You have to remember that during that time, women's roles, their expected roles, were largely confined to the domestic sphere, raising children, taking care of the home, things like that. And on top of that, their intellectual contributions, anytime a woman spoke up or, wrote a book, it was often dismissed or even worse, it was attributed to men. Like it was impossible that a woman could come up with these brilliant ideas on her own.
It's unbelievable. Like, just because she's a woman, they couldn't fathom that she could actually be capable of writing something so profound.
Yeah.
And, it gets worse, because even after Mary Shelley was officially credited as the author, some critics still insisted that her husband, Percy Shelley, must have actually written the book. It's like they just couldn't accept that a woman could write something so smart and powerful and imaginative.
It really is a testament to how deeply ingrained those biases were. But you know what I think is so interesting about the way that they handle it in our text, the editors?
What's that?
Well, they don't just acknowledge the injustices, they go deeper than that. They connect those experiences in Mary Shelley's life, her unconventional upbringing, for example, and even, the tragedy of losing a child. They link all of that to the depth and the complexity of the story she tells in Frankenstein.
That's a really interesting connection.
Right. They're saying that her unique perspective, which was shaped by her experiences as a woman, is a big part of what makes this novel so powerful and so enduring.
It makes sense, though. It wasn't just a story to her. She was pouring her own life, her own struggles into it. It definitely adds a whole other layer to the text when you know that.
And that's why it still resonates with readers today. Because those struggles, the loss, the grief, the desire for connection, those are universal themes. They transcend time and place.
It really makes you realize that Frankenstein isn't just a scary story about a monster, is it? It's about so much more than that.
It really is. And speaking of those deeper layers, there's something else the editors point out that I found really interesting.
What's that?
Well, they draw a parallel between unmothered children, like the creature, and scientific experiments.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way before.
It's not a connection you'd make right away, but they're basically saying that both situations, abandoning a child and conducting scientific experiments without really thinking about the potential consequences, they both involve a kind of recklessness, like a lack of foresight that can have pretty devastating effects.
I see what you mean.
Like a good real-world example of this is something like the Manhattan Project. If you think about it, the scientists working on that were brilliant. Truly brilliant minds. And they were racing against time to try to end World War II, which is an incredibly important goal, right? But the thing is, they also unleashed this force with unimaginable destructive power, the atomic bomb. And I think that's another example of what Mary Shelley was getting at in the novel, this idea that we have to grapple with the responsibility of our creations.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is. And it's something that we're still grappling with today. It's like, yeah, we need to push the boundaries of what's possible. But we also have to remember that it's not enough to simply chase knowledge for knowledge's sake. We have to consider the ethical implications of what we discover, of what we create. It's not just about can we, it's about should we.
Right. So with Frankenstein, Mary Shelley is basically handing us this amazing tool, right? It's a story, yes, but it's also a way to think about all of these huge issues. And our text does a really good job at giving us some questions to think about as we read. There's a couple in here that really stood out to me, and I would love to get your take on them. What do you think?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Okay, so first up, how did Mary Shelley, at just 18 years old, how did she write something that feels so relevant to us now, centuries later? How does she tap into all of this stuff about science and technology in a way that still resonates with us today?
It's a great question, and it's one that scholars have been debating ever since Frankenstein was published.
Right. Like, how did she know?
It is really kind of mind-blowing. But I think a part of it was probably her exposure to the scientific discussions that were happening at the time. Because remember, she was writing during this incredible period of intellectual ferment. New discoveries were happening all the time, and it wasn't just happening in like science journals. It was everywhere. It was in the air.
So she was absorbing all of that.
Yes. And don't forget, she was also surrounded by some very prominent intellectuals. I mean, her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, the famous feminist writer.
Oh, wow. Of course.
Right. I mean, talk about a role model.
Yeah.
And then her father was William Godwin, who was a well-known political philosopher. So Mary grew up surrounded by these big thinkers. These big ideas were basically her bread and butter.
So she was basically raised by intellectual rock stars.
Right. So is it any wonder that she was interested in exploring these big questions about scientific progress and the implications for humanity?
It makes a lot of sense when you put it that way.
And let's not forget, Frankenstein isn't just about the science itself, right? It's about the drama, It's about the ethics. It's about what happens to humanity when we push the boundaries of what's possible.
That's so true. It's the intersection of science and humanity that makes it so haunting, so thought-provoking. Okay, I have another question for the text here that really caught my attention. This one says, in the last of the letters, Victor slips into this language of fate and predetermination. In what ways is his future fated? And in what ways is it of his own making? And why is he using this language of fate at this point in the story?
Oh, that's a great one. That question gets right to the heart of one of the biggest philosophical debates of all time. Free will versus determinism. It makes you wonder, is Victor Frankenstein just a pawn of fate? Or does he have a choice, agency in shaping his own destiny? It's something that every reader has to decide for themselves.
It really makes you think. And what about the creature? Does he have free will? Or is he just a product of what his creator did?
Exactly. Is he bound by Victor's choices? Or does he have the power to forge his own path?
It's so good.
It's a testament to Mary Shelley's skill as a writer that she could weave all these complex questions into such a compelling story.
It really makes you think about that blurry line between real scientific progress and what just feels magical,
Yeah.
Like at what point does actual knowledge end and blind faith begin? It's kind of a scary thought in some ways.
And it's a question that Mary Shelley puts right at the center of Frankenstein. It's so central to what the whole story is about. And what's even crazier is that it's just as relevant today as it was back then, maybe even more so. We're living in this time of artificial intelligence and gene editing, technologies that would have seemed like pure magic just a few generations ago.
Totally. It's mind-blowing when you really think about it. And all those incredible advancements, they're forcing us to face these huge ethical considerations, right?
No.
Like we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And we might not actually understand how all these complex systems really work, but most of the time we just put our faith in them anyway. We trust the science.
It's true. I mean, they're improving our lives in so many ways.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting because that faith that we're talking about is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like we have to rely on experts, on systems to help us navigate the world. I mean, life is really complicated. But I think what Frankenstein reminds us is that blind faith, faith without responsibility or critical thought, well, that's how you end up with really dangerous outcomes. It can't just be about blindly trusting.
Right, so it's not about rejecting scientific progress altogether. It's more about approaching these advancements with open eyes, right? Like with a healthy dose of, okay, but what if?
Yes, exactly. And a deep understanding that even when we're trying to do the right thing, our actions can still have unintended consequences. We can't lose sight of that.
It's like Mary Shelley is saying to all of us, hey, innovation is amazing. It can do so much good. But for the love of all that is holy, let's not forget to think about the what-ifs along the way.
Yes, 100%. And it's that message, that's what continues to resonate with us centuries later. She was really onto something.
No kidding. Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been absolutely mind-blowing. It's really amazing how much depth and nuance there is to Frankenstein, even though it's a story we all think we know.
It's true. It's so much more than just a monster story. And it really shows you the power of great literature to spark these conversations. The best books, they just stay with you.
I couldn't agree more. It's timeless. And a huge thank you to you for lending your expertise to this conversation. It's been a pleasure picking your brain.
Oh, anytime. I always love a good Frankenstein chat.
And to everyone listening, if you haven't revisited Frankenstein lately or ever, really, I highly recommend it. You might be surprised how much it makes you think about the world we live in. And that's it for us this time. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and never stop exploring.